All right, well, welcome to Beyond Gender. My name is Jarrett Davis. I'm a social researcher working for Love146. I understand that a number of you might be coming from the previous session with Dr. Glenn Miles. We've been working together for about 2 years now, and it's been my privilege and honor to work with him. And we've been looking at we've been doing a series of studies on people groups who are often overlooked in the conversation on human trafficking and sexual exploitation, and those being predominantly males. And what I'm looking at here today is transgender. What I'm going to be presenting to you today is actually sort of a combination of two studies which we finished earlier this year. The first being study on transgender in Phnom Penh, and then the most recent one, which we just finished last month, was on transgender in Bangkok. And in particular, we're looking at transgender sex workers. So we're looking at those who are in Phnom Penh. These are largely people who are working in the freelance sex industry, and then in Bangkok we have about half that are working as freelance sex workers and half that are working within bar-based establishments. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump right in here. And bear with me, this is a new platform for me. I'm not used to doing any online presentations, so bear with me. Well, some of our objectives. First of all, our first objective is understanding. To understand some of the ways that ladyboys, that transgender, are involved in within sexual exploitation within Phnom Penh and Bangkok. And as a part of that, I think I'm going to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about what I mean by transgender and ladyboy. Transgender is the term that I predominantly will be using today. And sometimes I use them interchangeably with ladyboy. But it's important to say that transgender is more of the international working term for either a man or a woman that feels as if they are that feels and lives as if they are a different gender than what they were born. Whereas ladyboy, in this case, ladyboy is sort of like a male to female transgender. However, ladyboy carries a lot of additional cultural connotations. Ladyboy is sort of a cultural construct, something that is kind of carried throughout the Mekong region of Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand. And it is, rather than being, as we'd understand in the West, this is more seen as sort of a third gender, which has a lot of implications in and of itself, which we'll discuss later as we go throughout the presentation. Secondly here, one of our objectives is to dispel some of the myths surrounding sexual exploitation of boys and to consider possible interventions, not boys, I'm sorry, it's a typo there, exploitation of transgender or ladyboys, although we are very concerned with boys as well, and consider possible interventions for these groups, and to explore their vulnerabilities and the potential resiliencies, those things that we can learn from them by the resiliencies that they've developed, and to consider the role of both the secular and faith-based NGO communities in this discussion. We'll talk about this on the next slide, but in particular, within the conversation, within the trafficking and exploitation movement, faith-based groups have often spearheaded many initiatives working against trafficking and exploitation, and in some ways there's a challenge with faith-based groups. While they've spearheaded a lot of the way, in order to talk about male exploitation and to talk about transgender, we have to approach the gay issue, something which is often very difficult to talk about in many faith-based circles. Not all, but many. And so this is it's important that that we're having this discussion and at the time that we are. And that brings us into some of the reasons that they are overlooked. one of the reasons being that Christian groups often, what we're finding is often don't want to be seen as pro-gay. This is point number 2 on the slide. And whereas secular groups don't want to be seen as anti-gay. And whereas Christian groups, if they engage this sort of issue, there's a fear of being seen as pro-gay, and they don't want to seem as too supportive, whereas secular groups are afraid to be, seen as demonizing LGBT groups. Secondly, and the first point on the slide here, transgender are often seen through a kind of hypersexualized lens. Society often assumes that that transgender are in the sex industry because it's simply who they are, and we see this across the board. And I've seen this in across particularly the Mekong region, and even in the West. This idea that that one is a sexuality, and it's almost like a cultural construct, whereas it's in some ways it's sort of implicit within the ladyboy cultural construct, that one is a sexuality and little else. One is in some ways identified in terms of who they have sex with, and when that becomes one's identity, there's a potential for many implications. So oftentimes, they're seen through this hypersexualized lens, and whereas we focus on the areas of their personhood that deals with their sexuality, but often minimize other parts of their human identity. Thirdly, virginity is highly prized in girls by many Asian societies. Transgender can't get pregnant, and thus the risks of violence are largely ignored. And the idea also is that, well, if they're simply a sexuality and they're doing it because it's who they are, and the idea is that they like it, they're not seen as vulnerable, they're not seen as exploited because, well, they're a sexuality, they like it anyway. So we would like to challenge some of these assumptions as we move forward. So let's look at our sampling here. In Phnom Penh, we dealt with 50 sex workers, 50 sex workers who self-identified as ladyboy or third gender within or near the Phnom Penh area. The predominant number of these interviews were collected among freelance sex workers. The industry in Phnom Penh is largely freelance, collected within public areas within Phnom Penh. This involved data teams going out very late at night, often after midnight, and coming back before around 4 in the morning. But we went to where they were working and invited them to be a part of interviews to help to understand them better. 6 interviews were collected from Men's Health Cambodia, a local Khmer NGO working with LGBT groups. And 9 interviews were collected within residential areas where transgender groups live. All of the interviews were done by Cambodian nationals, and the data was collected earlier this year, February through April 2013. Bangkok was actually collected. We just finished that study last month, where we did interviews with 60 sex workers who self-identified as ladyboy, working within 4 areas in Bangkok known to be key to the sex industry, particularly among transgender. 38 of those interviews, about 63%, were from those working as freelancers, and 22 were from those working within establishments. That's go-go bars, karaoke bars, where people often might be dancing and are then taken home by clients for sex and otherwise. And I'm not going to be focusing too much on Bangkok in this study. I'm going to be predominantly focusing on Phnom Penh, but Bangkok will be used predominantly to be giving context and comparison in the presentation. We're not at the point yet where I think we can move forward with. So we're still kind of working through a lot of analysis in Bangkok, but but there are some key themes that are arising, which I can share in this presentation. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to be focusing predominantly in Phnom Penh. In regards to eligibility, all of our respondents were biologically male at birth, self-identifying as female or third gender, reporting to have been paid to have sex within the past month, and able and willing to give informed consent to participate in the study. This is a key point, largely because there's a number of our respondents who were, well, not predominantly, but maybe 5 or 6 that we had to turn down for interviews because they were either under the influence of drugs or inhalants, and some of those are common among sex workers in Phnom Penh. Some ethical considerations. All of our interviewers were trained using UNIAP, UNAIP, ethical guidelines for human trafficking research. They were given orientations and training and protocol for. They were given situations and role-playing scenarios for interviews before they actually went into the field. They were provided with references for sexual health counseling services and legal aid, and all respondents were given informed consent and were told that they were able to skip any questions or stop the interview at any time. So let's jump in. Looking at demographics, the mean age of our respondents were about 27 years old. This number is a bit was offset by a few people who were significantly older. You see we have about 8 in the 30 to 33 range and 6 who were 34 or over. But the predominant number of our respondents, at least half of our respondents, fall within the UNICEF's definition of youth. And while this is not particularly about, these are not all our respondents at the time of the interviews are not children, we can learn a lot about where they came from, their lives growing up, and who they are as people. About 88% began their sex work before the age of 24, within that window of 15 to 24 years, the UNICEF's definition of youth, within UNICEF's definition of youth. And about 16% began sex work before the age of 18. Looking at their demographics, and this is very similar to what we found in Bangkok. Those in Phnom Penh, we found similarly in Bangkok that about a quarter of our respondents had already been living in Phnom Penh, same as in Bangkok. And the predominant number in Phnom Penh here, the blue part of the pie chart here, about 63% immigrated because they were looking for work. They needed money. Many of them indicating having to support family members or parents being sick and having to immigrate to the city in search of money. About 14%, we asked about their educational attainment. About half had ended their schooling between the 7th and 10th grades. About 14% were unable to complete a primary level education. And less than 15% were able to finish a high school education. This is significantly lower than what we found in Bangkok, where there are a number of other options available. We asked them what brought them into the sex industry. What brought them into this type of work? Why? What brought them there? We got a number of responses. I do sex work to earn and save money, to support myself and to send money to my family. Transgender, can't find a good job. I'm doing this sex work to help my family pay our debt. I'd rather get hurt as long as my family is happy. I cry often after I go out with clients. And then there were others giving somewhat of a contrasted response. I want to be with men and have sex with them. This is something that we did find among a number of our respondents, and we'll talk a bit more about that in slides to come. Looking at some of the financial implications, about we see the calculated average. So we asked them about their 3-month incomes, or their 3-month earnings, and the predominant number of people, about 18, stated earning between $300 and $449 within a 3-month period. That's about 106 on average. Looking at everyone, they earn about $106 a month. 28% state that sex work was their only employment, and about half state that sex work was their primary employment, and then they had other employment alongside of that. 78% indicate having to regularly support their families. Many, as I said, supporting relatives who are sick, parents, tuition for brothers and sisters, and the like. 60% cite that their families are in debt, and 1 in 5 interviewed indicate coming from families who had debts of $1,000 or more. Looking at the stigma and discrimination, we asked our respondents to what extent they experienced stigma and discrimination in their daily lives. We looked, and a number of them, high number of them, indicated that almost everyone indicated that they did receive discrimination for being a ladyboy. And we asked them why they believed that that people discriminated against them, and we found about 20 out of the 50, so about half, stated that I'm discriminated because people don't understand the transgender lifestyle. Others, about 21, said that they didn't think the transgender lifestyle, that they thought that the transgender lifestyle was shameful. And the majority, about 32, about 2/3 of the group, more than 2/3, say that I'm discriminated because people disapprove of my lifestyle or behavior. 39% had been refused employment. So about 40% had been refused employment or lost a job because they are transgender. About 1 in 5, or 20%, have had to change place of residence or unable to rent accommodation. About 12% have been prevented or dismissed from an educational institution, and 10%, 1 in 10, had been denied health services because they're transgender. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of stigma that's applied to them, beliefs that they all have HIV, or beliefs that other bad omens and things that are associated with being transgender. We asked them who discriminated against them, who showed them the most discrimination. And predominantly, out of 30 people answering this question, 29 stated that they were discriminated by police, most of all. About half said that they were discriminated by their parents, and 15 were discriminated by other relatives, and 10 by teachers, and 10 by friends. I think it's important here to look at the first 3 on this chart. That the first 3 here, the stated sources of stigma and discrimination, were from police, parents, and other relatives. These are all 3 institutions that are intended to bring safety, security. Police being members of bringing safety in a public sphere, and then parents and other relatives being other key identity shaping structures in a child's developmental years. That's very key to understand. Some quotes here. They said, if I cut my hair short and dress up as a man, then they will let me study or work. But if I dress up as a girl with long hair, I will not be allowed to go to school or work. Another one said, people stop me from going to the pagoda because they're afraid that I will go to have sex with the monks. We asked respondents about various sorts of feelings that they have had about themselves because they are transgender within the past 12 months. This was done to kind of understand, understand a little bit of their experience of living within Cambodian society as a ladyboy, as transgender. About 46% of those we asked indicated that within the past 12 months they've felt ashamed because of being transgender. About 42% felt guilty. About 52% said that they blamed themselves. Other common facets were about 32% indicate low self-esteem. 1 in 4 state that they feel that they should be punished, and perhaps most notably here, about 1 in 5 state that within the past year, because they are transgender, they have felt suicidal, or they've contemplated taking their lives. I feel like this is and once again, as a part of our ethical protocol, we were sure to give counseling and other references that were appropriate to those respondents who indicated that they had felt suicidal. But I feel this is very telling. And even while in Bangkok these numbers seem to be a bit lower, they still are of significant concern. Within Bangkok, we found about 1 in 10 state that they have felt suicidal in relation to their work in the industry. And other common themes were about 60% in Bangkok who had felt ashamed, and the next very common theme was having low self-esteem. They say that men make fun of me because they don't know that I get hurt by those comments. I can't sleep because of those comments. Every day I desire peace. I feel angry when people look down on ladyboys. I feel very ashamed because people make fun of me. I regret that I was born like this. I blame myself. Why was I not born as a girl? I feel suicidal when I think about my boyfriend breaking up with me. And this is also something I think that is of particular interest. We see very relationships within among ladyboys in the sex industry that we interviewed. We see almost this sort of like a knight in shining armor mentality, looking for a man to kind of sort of rescue them from their financial situation, rescue them from often from Cambodia or from their present straits. Kind of a common theme in some ways, and I think this particularly would deserve some attention in future, hopefully qualitative research. Looking at the relationships, we find that we asked them to what extent being a ladyboy had a effect on their intimate personal relationships, and a number of different responses. About a third said that it did have an effect, and it had a positive effect, and about another 35% said that it had a negative effect. 22% said neutral. 10% said it was kind of mixed. What we're finding in a lot of the narratives a lot of the discussions that we've had around these subjects is those who indicate having a very positive, that being a ladyboy has a very positive effect on their intimate personal relationships, is usually in reference to the sorts of friends and social groups that they've been able to develop because they're transgender, usually with other transgender. We asked them about if they've had a best friend. About 96% state that they had a best friend, and 90% of their best friends are another transgender. They stick together. It's a very cohesive group, which is very common among groups who experience heavy levels of marginalization. There's sort of an in-group identity that's formed, and it's an incredibly cohesive group. So to that extent, and this is what we're finding in a lot of our discussions with them, is that that the positive effects often come from that kind of group cohesion with other transgenders, the transgender identity, the ladyboy identity, that in-group identity that they often live within. We asked about their family awareness, if their families were aware of their work within the sex industry. So we assume that we asked if their families were aware that they were transgender. Notably, that many of these people are living away from their families. They've migrated. 88% say that their families are aware that they're transgender. 12% of their families state that they are unaware. My friends love me. I have friends that are bisexual, girls, transgender. My family, however, does not accept me. I'm the only son. And this brings us into the gender and sexual identity. We asked respondents how they understood their own gender. We have a little less than half stated that I am transgender or third gender, as what they responded. 6% say that I am a man, that they feel that they're still a man, and about 46% say that they're a woman. We then asked them what they hope. It was sort of an open-ended question. We asked, when you're reincarnated, what do you hope to be? And we found it very interesting that about a little over half said that when I'm reincarnated, I want to be not just female, but they said, I want to be a real woman. I want to be a real woman when I'm reincarnated. About 6% said that I want to be a man. I don't want to feel like this. Another 6% said that they don't care, or they don't really know what they would like to be. But perhaps most interestingly, about 31% said that they don't care whether they're male or female. They simply want to be something definite. And it's at this point that I think it's important to discuss some of the gender role dichotomies that are very common in Southeast Asian societies. In Southeast Asia, whereas in the West we often think in terms of identity. I understand myself as a woman, therefore I'm a woman, or I understand myself as a man, therefore I'm a man. In Southeast Asia it works a bit differently. Southeast Asia works within identity is not as important as one's role in society. If I'm a man, then I act as a man. I fulfill a male's role. A man is strong, is tough. He protects his family. He has children, and there's particular social and cultural expectations for a man to fulfill. For women, on the other hand, there's the similar things. A woman marries a man. A woman has children. A woman raises those children. She's softer. She's gentle. There's all sorts of roles for those things, and those roles are very, very strictly adhered to and prescribed. But for those people who don't fit, who are biologically one thing but feel like another thing, it's what then do I become? Where do I fit? And even, for instance, in Khmer, as in Thailand, as in the Philippines, there is no word for straight. To say straight male is literally to say a real man. To say a straight woman or a heterosexual woman is to say a real woman. The distinction, there is no distinction between the two. One person says, I want to be a real person, like a man or a woman. This is a very telling quote. This idea that someone who is biologically a male but feels like a woman is neither male nor female, we know that males are persons, and we know that females are persons. And then the question becomes for many ladyboys, it seems, in Cambodian society, and is, who then am I? I want to be a real person, like a man or a woman. Looking at their sexual gender identity, looking further here, we asked, when did you first start dressing as a woman? And if you'll notice here in the chart on the screen, you see almost two bell curves here. We see one peak around 5 years old, and we see another peak around 15. And what we see here is we see that these people who were literally there, they were either born as a male and they were dressed as a female growing up. And then there's the second group here, which we often find people who just simply, they've grown up and they couldn't fight it anymore and just say, hey, this is who I am, and they've started dressing as a girl. Quotes here, he said, my mom dressed me as a girl because she wanted a girl. I was the first child. And another says, I can't fight nature. I'm pretty and I love myself. And one of my personal favorite quotes. We find, interestingly, a similar sort of a double bell curve in the Bangkok study. We see a peak around 5 years of age. when people say that when they first became a ladyboy, about a peak around the age of about 5 years old, when people say that, I was about 5 years old when I became a ladyboy, and another peak around the age of about 14 or 15 when they hit puberty. And the question here, between these two slides, is this perhaps these two distinctive bell curves indicative of the nature-nurture debate? And it's kind of an interesting discussion here. All stated that their first sexual partners were male. For 1 in 5, their first sexual experience was forced or coerced. And we asked them who this first sexual partner was. For about 32% of them, their first sexual partner was a friend, and then another 32% it was a stranger. With 18% say it was a neighbor. When I was 12, a group of people took me far away from home, beat me up and left me there. One guy, 25, rescued me and took me home. He asked if he could have sex with me, and I said yes, because he rescued me. This is something that's very common that we've seen here there's some confusion, and this is something that I think could inform future studies. There's some confusion between what we mean by forced and consensual sex. For instance, here, this person was rescued by someone and then asked to have sex with him, and he simply said yes because he felt indebted to him. This case was marked as consensual. This person understood it as consensual sex because he owed it to him. Looking at sex work, about 75% of clients were Khmer. A third indicated of the clients were Khmer. And this is what's interesting here is it's very commonly understood that it's commonly stated in both Cambodia and Thailand that it's kind of understood that this is sort of a foreign issue, that it's foreigners that come and support the sex industry. We found about 75% of the clients were Khmer, and 36% indicate were Khmer. We asked respondents about a number of clients that they had per week. About 26 of our respondents had an average of about 1 to 3 clients in a week, and a few of our clients, 13 of them, had above 10. With the average was about 7 clients in a week. 74% indicated physical harassment, unsolicited touching, fondling within the past 12 months. 40% having experienced physical assault within the past 12 months. And interesting to this, regarding physical assault, and this is something that we found definitely needs to be addressed within public policy within Cambodia. When we asked about who assaulted them, who physically assaulted them within the past 12 months, nearly 40% of those assaults were reported to be committed by police. And it's very common if in the areas that we would be gathering our data is it's very common that police would travel around on motos and often would arrest or accost ladyboys, and anecdotally it's stated that that ladyboys are sort of stereotyped. They're understood that they're all thieves. So police often would, our respondents indicated that the police would often would abuse or accost them preemptively, understanding that, well, they're thieves anyway. I really hate the police. They chase us like dogs, says one. Some policemen come to inspect us and they put drugs in our pockets. When they inspect us and find the drugs, they arrest us. Looking at violence and sexual abuse, over half indicated instances of forced or coercive sex. When asked how many times this has happened, how frequently this happened, about half of them said that this happened between 1 to 5 times. About 1 in 5 of our respondents stated that this happened between 5 and 10 times in the past, and about 13 stated that this has happened about 10 to 20 times in their experience. 2 people said 50 times. said that this has happened as much as 50 times within their life, or 2%, I'm sorry, said that this has happened as much as 50 times. What we did then, we asked people if they had been forced to have sex during the work. We asked them if they could share a little bit about what had happened. A number of people did. About 20 people. About 20 people chose to share stories, and then we basically broke those down and did a content analysis of those stories. And among those stories of forced or coercive sex, about 11 of them include instances of physical violence. 9 indicate instances of group sex. 4 indicate not receiving payment. In 3 of the stories, weapons were used during the rape or forced sex. 2 instances involved forced bareback, where they were condoms were not used, forced to have sex without a condom, and one story involved forced drug usage. One says, a group of people forced me to have sex with them at the same time. They held me down and had sex with me. When I tried to move, they pointed a knife at me. They would kill me if I didn't do it. While I was hanging out with clients, they enticed me to go into the forest and forced me to have sex. When I refused, they strangled me, so I gave in. It was a group of 6 or 7 guys. Others say if I didn't do it well, meaning oral sex, they would beat me up. They asked for money, but I didn't give it to them, and then they beat me up. Looking at sexual health, we see about 1 in 5 indicate instances of rashes, lumps, ulcerations in the general area in the last few months. 34%, about a third, indicate urethral discharge. 56% indicate other sicknesses. However, in terms of sexual health services, we find about 92%, we found people fairly able to identify the ways that HIV is transmitted from person to person. 92% correctly identifying sex, and 80% specifically mentioning sex without a condom. Looking at their illegal drug usage. About 10% indicate illegal drugs, particularly crystal methamphetamines, high alcohol consumption with their clients, and also the usage of many appearance-altering drugs. About 22% were on estrogen supplements, and they discussed injections of oil-like substances into their cheeks, done crudely outside of, not properly within a clinic setting, but crude injections of substances into their cheeks to give the appearance of a more full cheeks, to make them appear more as women. We then asked them about the perceived jobs for transgender in Cambodia, and once again we see. There's a theme here that we begin to see. About 28% said hairdressing, 26% say beautician, and understanding what very working as entertainment workers. We asked them about the skills that they desired. About 41% mentioned hairdressing, 27% mentioned being a beautician, 14% mentioned clothes design. And what we find here, as we start asking them about what they perceive to be a future for them, we find things that careers that often run very stereotypically along what is culturally constructed to be for ladyboys. We see, many people who they felt that they working as hairdressers or beauticians or actresses, and but very few people seeing themselves as doing anything else. We asked about their dignity and self-identity. Many people, about 12%, believe that that they became transgender because of karma. 14% because of karma, saying that the elders. One person says that the elders have told me that we are ladyboys because in our previous lives we have taken other women's husbands. And about 54% state nature. So looking at this group as a whole, We see a high vulnerability for sexual abuse for physical abuse and sexual violence, particularly from some of the key identity shaping structures in their lives. We see from police officers, from even police officers and people who are meant to bring them protection. There's a seemingly inherent fatalism within transgender social identity, kind of a narrow perception of options for their future. And one thing that I think is important to discuss here is when we see a lot of NGOs that provide services for transgender. When we see NGOs that are providing services for transgender, we see a lot of LGBT organizations that provide help or provide assistance for them as MSM, as transgender, as sex workers, and oftentimes these NGOs we see a lot of engagement with the transgender community on the basis of their having sex with men, on the basis of their sex work, on the basis of their sexuality, but often little engagement with them as whole human beings who are capable of many other things other than simply more than just a sexuality. There's a significant isolation from key identity-shaping structures in society, estrangement from families, high identification with other transgender, and little community integration. A significant indication that their sex work may proceed from their social identities, from their very understandings of themselves as transgender. One person says, I don't like sex work, but I have no choice. But I like it because it gives me the opportunity to have sex with men easily. It is my fantasy. I like sex work because it's easy to get sex with men because I'm a ladyboy. I can earn extra money to support my life. If we have a group of people who understand themselves, what we're seeing is if we see a group of people that often understand themselves as a sexuality, they understand themselves in terms of who they have sex with, but often little else. It becomes a kind of in-group identity, which then affects the ways that they look at the world around them, at their potential, their future. So very quickly, here's some recommendations. Sexual exploitation has almost exclusively, the conversation of sexual exploitation is almost exclusively focused on young girls and some women. Young men and transgender need a higher profile by the anti-trafficking movement. Alternative job opportunities need to be provided to transgender people who are seeking to leave the sex industry. Free or low-cost vocational and life skills training programs provided by NGOs or local churches would be greatly beneficial for young men working in this industry. Creation of social services and safe places which cater to the development of whole integrated persons, not simply people who have sexuality, or not as simply to people who are sexualities, but people who are whole integrated persons. Development of safe places that can respect them holistically as individuals, including their sexuality, but not making that the whole thing. And also continued careful research that recognizes and affirms holistic human need and vulnerability. Well, that's where we leave off, and I look forward to your questions. I hope that this has been communicated. I've found that it's a bit difficult presenting to a computer and not in a room of people, but I do look forward to answering your questions and engaging with you following the session. Thank you.